Hello, this is Robert Gomez. Thank you for watching this CXO Academy video. Today we'll be discussing how to load data into CXO straight from an Excel spreadsheet and create a tabular model that will allow us to use CXO's full capabilities. If you see here, this will be the end result. We have a table at the top with periods going across. That's the rolling 12 months. We have a point of view with our entity and category where we can select actual or budget. We can also expand on the rows, which are our accounts. And we have a chart at the bottom that actually listens to whatever we have selected at the table above. So let's get right into it. As you see here, this is the Excel spreadsheet that we will be using. It is just a big data dump from 2015 to 2018 of fake data. If you see here, we have entity at the top, category, account. We also have our value column and our date. Notice that our date is just a full date and not split out by period or month. We'll be going over while creating our model on how to split that out. But if you see here, it's just approximately over 4,800 rows. So let's get to that. What I've done with this Excel spreadsheet is I've loaded it into a SQL table. If you see here, I have a database that I had previously created, and you see finance data. I simply did that by just going to task and import data, and it'll give you a brand new table. So now the real fun begins. I've opened up my Microsoft Analysis Services, and we are going to create a new model. We're going to model the data that we saw in the Excel spreadsheet. So we open up our analysis services and hit the add model. We're going to name this model finance model just for the sake of staying relevant. And we're going to select Azure SQL database. As you see here, I've filled out all the details for this connection to the SQL Server, which we have loaded our table to. If you see the database, it is the same database that I created and added my table to. We'll go and hit Test Connection and hit Next to finally create the model. If you see now, it is asking me which tables within that database I want to import into this model. And I only have one table so far, and that is the finance data table, which I showed. So we'll hit create so that the model gets created. So the first screen, once I create my model, will be, as you see at the top, our model in a web designer. We can either drag and drop tables into the diagram, or we can simply select automatically arrange. In this case, we'll go ahead and do that. And if you do that, you'll see now all your columns that you had in your Excel sheet. So we see our entity, category, account, the none, which is actually our value, and the date. Now, what we can do now, the way the CXO reads it is by dimensions. So each of these columns will actually be a dimension, and we'll actually create some other calculated columns that we can reference within CXO. We'll now go into calculated columns. And what we'll do here is we'll add a column, for example, for month, because we have the date, but we have that as a full amount. And for this month, what I'll do is I'll type in format. We're going to format, this column will simply be our same date column. We're going to format date. I can remove this part. We'll just do date. And the format of it will be MMMM, so 4 M's. And what this does is it gives us our month from the date column, but it gives it to us in a full name. So instead of 01, 02, we'll have January, February, March, and so on. So that's one of our calculated columns. The next column we'll add is the same column, but for year. So at this point, we're basically splitting out the date dimension into different readable dimensions within CXO. For the year dimension, I'll do something very similar, and that is format. And what I'll do this time is, again, the date. Remove this part to make it cleaner. The date, and the format for that will be YYYY. And what that does is now gives us the year in the full 4 digits. So 2018, 2017, and so on. Another one we'll need is our quarter dimension. And for this one, it's a little trickier. I've written down this formula, which is concatenate. And what I'm concatenating is the letter Q. And then simply I'm rounding up of our month. And simply our date, our month from our date. And after on, we'll close these parentheses and divide that by 3 and then a 0. So that should give us a Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. We'll now add a view column. And this column, we're just going to simply call it periodic. And what this will allow us to do is within CXO, we can create a cube calc for year to date. So that way, we'll have a dimension called view, which mostly it'll be periodic for now. But we can, again, create a year to date calc within CXO. So I'll show that in a bit. We'll go ahead and hit save and close. One thing I do want to do though is our month. 1 second. We'll see now our month. We want to sort our months by date. And the reason being is that if we do not do this, our months will be in alphabetical order. So they will not be January, February, March, and so on. And now they will indeed be. Another thing we need to add to this model is a hierarchy. So we are going to create a hierarchy for period so that within CXO, if you see now within CXO here, we have, it goes from Q1, January, February, March, Q2, and then those months and so on. So I've created a hierarchy. I'll call this period. And for hierarchy levels, I'm not going to add the year into here. And the reason being that we still want to split out the year and then the actual period so that we can more easily toggle between different views in CXO. So my actual first level of this hierarchy will be the quarter. And after the quarter, it'll be the month. So we'll go ahead and hit apply. Now, once that is created, we need one last item, and that is measures. Without the measures, we will not show actual numbers within CXO. We'll just show a count of what the value column is showing. In this case, we'll call this value, and this will simply be just a sum. If you see here, it'll be a sum of our none, which is the value column. So sum none, save and close. Now what I can do after all these have been created is I can hide the duplicates. For example, none we're not going to be using anymore because we've created a measure for it. Our date, month, and quarter columns we're not going to be using because we've created a hierarchy for them. So we see them down here. We no longer need them to be repeated. So also under properties, I'll make sure that it is hidden, it's ticked on, and I'll hit apply. So what this will do is now you'll see these same names here grayed out, and that should show you that they will be hidden within CXO. So at this point, we want to hit save layout. So if I now go into the CXO source system manager, we have a cube called finance that I've just created here by adding source system. It's pretty self-explanatory as far as filling in the details. Again, you'll have to type in the Microsoft Analysis Server, database, and the cube, which are just the name of the model that we've just created. And what we can now do is go to dimension mapping. And if you see here, all the accounts are mapped in a way that CXO understands. So for example, the account dimension, our entity category, we can now select our period, which was not a dimension before. So we've selected the whole actual hierarchy. We have our view, and then our measures, which is just our value column. So we hit save, we'll close out of here. Same with our period frequency. If you see here, this will allow CXO to know when to go backwards in a year if you're using dynamic lists. So if you see here, I've just mapped Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, and we'll go ahead and close that out. So now, at this point in time, we'll go into the CXO website to finally create our report. So we are now within our CXO website. We'll go to the top right where it says CXO Designer. This is where we create reports and perform functional admin tasks. We'll go to New Report at the top, and we'll select for the name, we'll do Finance Demo, for example. For source system, we'll select the finance source system that we just created and map dimensions to, as I showed. We can either select an existing template or we'll create a new free format. So in this case, we're trying to replicate the same report that I showed at the beginning. We'll add a control, and this is where you can add all sorts of visualizations and different tables and such. We'll add a table at the very top. We'll resize it to about, since we'll have a lot of columns but not so many rows, we'll make it a bit wide. And we'll add for now, let's just finish off the table, and then we'll add the bars and line charts. So as you see here for the table, we'll add a rows and a columns list because that's what it's having me do. So for rows, since I know that I want my accounts on the rows, I'll create a list called rows accounts. And for dimensions, I know that I want my account in there and nothing else for this moment. So I'll just add account, and I'll use the selected list. So I have nothing in that list at the moment still, so I'll add one item. And if you see, this item by default is services revenue, but that's fine for now. We'll keep it at one item. We'll edit that in a second. For my columns, I'll do the same thing, a new list. I'll call it columns or call periods. And what I'll do now for my dimensions under finance, I'll select the year and the period, right? Because we're going to do the rolling 12 months. And if it goes back past the current year, then it knows to switch over to last year. So now I have a for my columns, actually, I do not have an item yet. I'll add an item, and that'll be by default the current month in the system, which in this case is August 17th. If you see here now, we have services revenue and we have one number. Okay, I'll now go back to edit layout and add my chart. First, for the table, I'll select to not show a border and to grow vertically. What this will do is it'll push the chart that's underneath it down if it grows. So in the case that we expand the rows, the bar and line chart underneath there will also grow. So we'll add this and make sure that it's somewhat aligned right underneath that. And we'll go ahead and save and exit. So now, of course, it's unable to generate the report element, which is the bars and line charts, and that's because we haven't not added much to it. So we'll go ahead for bars and line charts. We'll also add a bar category axis. In this case, it'll be our periods. So we'll use the same periods, the same list that we're using for our columns, just to have them match. And for our bars, we want our accounts. So in this case, we'll use the same accounts. And if you see now, we have a very basic bar. But of course, we're going to edit that. First, let's go back into our table and create the table that we had in our other report. If you see here at the bottom, this is where we select all the lists. For rows accounts, that's the row list I'm using. Instead of selecting the services revenue account, I'm simply going to select my all dimension. So that is my top level. And what I'll simply do is I'll have a drill of descendants exclusive. Or in this case, it'll give me a drill into all the different accounts, as you see here. Now for my columns, I can go ahead and collapse this a bit. Since I'll switch back to column periods. And you see here, at this moment, I have 2017 August. I can add another item or even add a couple more items. This moment I have 3. What I can do now, I'll keep one at add occur, which will always listen to the current month, but the other ones I can do -1, and this will give me July, -2, and this will give me June, and so on. So I've created this list so far with only 3 members, but I can keep on going. If you see here, I'll add one more. It'll be -3, and then I can simply move it to the top so that it's in order, and so on. So I'm creating sort of a rolling list. Now what we can do within CXO is reuse lists. So we use share lists so that we can reuse them across reports and save some time. In this case, I'll show you how to use a share list. So in this case, we'll go back to our table here. And instead of, you see the column periods list being green, and that means it's a report list. So it is indeed not a share list. If I double click on that, I can replace that list by either another report list, I can create a new list, or I can go to share list where I have a share list already from the other report that I can reuse. So in this case, we're going to use a selected list, and you'll see that my table automatically changes and has all the rolling 12 months, which is good because I reused from the last report. Now, one last thing we want to do to our tables, we see all the headers repeat. We can go to labels, formats, and colors, and under merge column headers, we'll select the single layer. And what you'll see now is they blend together, the headers, so it looks pretty neat. Now for our table at the bottom, same thing sort of applies. Instead of adding one by one the months to that table or to that chart, I will simply overwrite the column periods category axis with a share list periods. And if you see now, we have the same periods as the top. Now, one thing we do need to get rid of is our legend, or we simply need to move it. Under our chart and legend section, we show legend at the moment, but we want to move it to the bottom, for example. So we'll move that to the bottom. Now you see all at the bottom. The legend height is currently taking 30% of the chart. Let's make that 15 so that we have a little bit more room. Now, one last thing we want to do is in the report I showed at the beginning, you could select any account from this table and the graph would update at the bottom. At this moment, it is not doing that. So in order to make it listen to this table, we'll go back to our edit layout, select the bars and line chart, and if you see here under listen to, we'll select our table. So now we'll go ahead and save. Now what this does is, now within our bars, we can open up our, if we go to bars and line charts, our bar series. What that'll be is, we'll edit it here, we'll go rows accounts, and we'll create a new list. We'll create a new list for bar series. And all we'll have there is an account. Again, just like in my rows, but instead of naming an account, so we'll use this list. And you'll see in just a second, I can edit now my bar series. And it's empty because I've just created this list. So the moment I add an item, it'll now listen to the table here. So anytime I select, for example, service revenues, restructuring, new software licenses, you see the chart at the bottom changing accordingly. One other thing we can add that I've added in the other report is a line series so that we can show our budget going across while the blue bars are our actuals. So if we select here, line series, we'll go ahead and report list, new list, and we'll call this line series. For dimensions, all we want to add is our category. Currently, everywhere else in the report, we're using actuals. For this case, we'll use this empty list at the moment. And we'll edit it and just add one item, which will be, instead of actuals, we'll switch this to budget. And as you're seeing now, I see a line. It's for the most part very similar to actuals, but you see it is a bit different, so that you see two different numbers. Now under format, I can go ahead and format my line. So I'll go ahead and create a link format. Format budget line in this case. And under chart section, I can select my line width. So in this case, I'll select 3 for the line width, and the dash style will select a broken line. We'll go ahead and hit save, and you'll see that this line now is a little thicker and broken as per the report that we made. The only thing we have left is now to give this bar and line chart at the bottom a title, and we do that by going to the bar and line chart section. For chart title, for example, I wanted to say 12-month rolling, but at the very front of it, or at the very end for the effect, I wanted to always display whichever account we have selected at the table that it's listening to. So in this case, I'll do within brackets, within square brackets, I'll do the ACC, which means account within CXO. So now that I do that, you'll see now I have my, or let's go back, let's get out of the designer so that we can see our final result. I can expand the table list, and you see that it pushes my chart to the bottom. And now you see 12-month rolling for all, because that's what I currently have highlighted. If I go to sales and marketing, you'll see now 12-month rolling sales and marketing. There are other things you can do with this, like highlight certain parts of the chart, hover over it to see the exact numbers for budget and actuals, zoom back out, and of course select different rows, or even change the category to actuals, budget, or even view it just by a single entity. So instead of all, we wanted to view EU, rest of the world, or USA. That about does it. If you see now, we went from our Excel sheet that we had, just a data dump of, into CXO, and we built a finance report within about 10-15 minutes from scratch while creating a model. Thanks for watching, and I hope this was helpful.